I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Have you ever felt resentful towards your partner for all the mental and emotional load you carry as a working mum? Or have you ever felt like the she-fault parent in your house, the default parent carrying all the domestic load? If you have, then this episode is for you. My guest is Eve Rodsky, author of Fair Play, the game-changing approach to sharing the mental load, rebalancing your relationship and transforming your life. It's a real-world solution for sharing the domestic and emotional load at home. Eve's background and expertise has given her a powerful perspective on this age-old problem. After her parents' divorce when she was 3, she watched her mother raise her and her brother as a single parent, experiencing firsthand the impact her mother had carrying all the domestic load. Eve became determined that when she grew up, she would build and sustain a 50-50 partnership. Eve gained her law degree from Harvard Law School and spent her career working for organisations such as JP Morgan. She married her husband Seth and combined her legal training, organisational management and mediation background to found the Philanthropic Advisory Group, where she advises wealthy families and organisations on how to give away tons of money to non-profits that serve the greater good. Both Eve and her husband were doing work they loved and were thriving, but cut to being married with 3 children and everything changed. After experiencing the pain, frustration and exhaustion of being the she-fault parent, Eve channeled all of her amazing experience in law, organisation and family mediation to create Fair Play. Reese Witherspoon describes Eve as the Marie Kondo for sorting out your life, not just your drawers, and had Eve's book as part of her book club. And it's not surprising because her work is brilliant. When I read Eve's book, it captured me right from the first page, and I found myself nodding along, underlining and highlighting on literally every page of this book. So I knew I had to get Eve on the podcast because I know you're going to love her and her work. And 2020 has been the year that has highlighted even further the load that working mums carry. During the pandemic, the burden of housework, home learning and parenting has fallen unequally on mothers. It seems that the gender inequalities that might exist in our homes has got worse during COVID. So Eve's message and her fair play approach are more important than ever. And I loved this conversation with Eve. She's warm, witty, honest, intelligent, strong, and a complete change maker. And she shares powerful stories about her life and what led her to write the book Fair Play. And it's packed full of relatable stories that I think you're going to love. She shares the toxic time messages we receive as women and how that perpetuates that having it all means doing it all paradigm. And she really addresses that the private issues that kind of show up in our homes that we often take personal kind of blame and feel guilty and shame for are actually public issues, that they're more about society and cultural issues. And I love that perspective. And she shares some really practical insights about how to bring your partner to the table if you have one, and practical ways that we can use our voice for more effective communication and to create fairness in our homes. We even have a little guest appearance from her 11-year-old son who shares his insights into fair play. And I just think you're going to love it. But just be aware that we use adult language in this episode. So if you're listening with little people's ears around, you might just want to use some headphones. I won't keep you any longer. Let me introduce my guest. So welcome, Eve. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast show. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I feel like this conversation is needed more than ever after what's happening in the U.S. right now with Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying, as you were saying earlier before. And I'm ready. So excited to be with your audience.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, now more than ever with also the pandemic, because I know you are experiencing this with the work that you're doing. You know, working mums are just drowning more than ever in the whole demands of what kind of work and life and the pandemic's bringing. So I know what you're going to share today is going to be so profound, but also practical for anybody listening.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do profound first with some of our. I feel like we'll do some consciousness raising, and I just want your listeners to know that we will absolutely get to the practical. But I needed to do some consciousness raising for myself as well in this journey, and so I like to say that that's part of the process of growth.
Absolutely. So obviously in your book, Fair Play, you start with this really powerful story, which I'd love for you to share, which is around the missing blueberries, because I think anybody listening will just get it. It's so relatable and just is a great metaphor for the experience of a lot of working mums out there. So would you mind sharing it?
Oh, no, of course. Nikki, it reminds me a lot of what's happening today, right? It was a day where it felt like the space-time continuum was sort of collapsing on me, which, reminds me of right now. And it was, you can literally, you can't make this shit up, right? This whole process of this 8-year journey into unpaid care, the mental load, right? This all started with a text my husband Seth sent me. And that text just said, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. Started this journey. And so you can picture the scene, right? I had a breast pump and a diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car, because this was right after my second son, Ben, was born. I had gifts for a newborn baby to return in the back seat of the car. I had a client contract on my lap because I'm a lawyer and a mediator. And I had opted out, and I'm putting that in quotes, even though your listeners can't see it. I'd opted out of the traditional workforce, somehow thinking that would bring more flexibility for me to be an entrepreneur and start my own firm. And I put that in quotes because we'll talk about that later, why I didn't opt out. Society pushed me out. But I had a client contract in my lap because I still work very analog, and a pen that was sort of in between my legs. And literally every time I would hit a stop sign, racing to get my older son at his toddler transition program, this pen would sort of stab me in the vagina. And in the midst of all of this chaos, and like I said, racing to get my older son, who was 3 at the time, at his toddler transition program. And again, in America, because we value working parents, those programs last like 7 minutes. But in the midst of all that chaos, Seth sent me that text. I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And I live in Los Angeles now. I'm from New York, but we take traffic very seriously here. And so for me to have pulled over, I pulled over once I got that text, and I just started sobbing. I started sobbing on the side of the road. And what I was thinking was, I guess the truth is, I was really thinking, like, this is so cliche, right? If my marriage is going to end, right, it should be over something like my affair with a football player, right? Or something like very dramatic. Not these damn fight over who's fulfilling whose smoothie needs at the moment. But what I was really thinking was, this is not the career marriage combo I thought I was going to have. And I was a decade into my marriage, 2 kids, one who was 3, one who was just born. And how did I get here? Right? How did I get to this place where I used to be able to manage employee teams? And now I'm blaming myself because I can't manage a grocery list. And more importantly, how would I become the default, or, as I call in Fair Play, you've read it, I call it the she-fault for literally every single household and domestic task. And even though I talk in gendered terms, these patterns, these hetero cisgender patterns do play out in same-sex couples, and we can talk about that too. But this is a gendered issue. This is an issue about women. And I think, Nikki, the last thing I will say is that I have so much privilege, right, for this not to happen to me. As I said before, I'm a trained mediator and lawyer. I'm literally trained to use my voice. Yeah. And so I could have been able to use it in my own marriage. And on top of that, I grew up in a single mom household. So I was her partner. And starting as early as 7, I would find eviction notices under our door because my mother would work at night. And I would wait up for her and show her the notice and tell her she had to pay her rent. And, so I was a parental child. I knew what it was like not to have another parent in the house. And so I had vowed I would have an equal partner in life. So I think that's why that day felt so profound for me, because I kept thinking to myself, if this is happening to me, it's probably happening to other women.
And literally everything you said there, Eve, has given me goosebumps, and hearing you say it, because obviously I've read you saying it, but hearing you say it is so powerful, because I'm just imagining so many of my listeners hearing you share that story and having their own version of that will have played out in their partnership, and knowing that those questions that go through our head, how have I got here? How has this happened? And actually that your kind of unique experience, expertise, life experiences have kind of come together in your zone of genius to be able to look at this problem for what it is. And actually, this is an old age problem, isn't it? You talk about it's the same shit, just a different generation. But you've actually come up with a game-changing solution to it. And I think that's what makes this so profound is, I think a lot of people know this, but I think the particular way you write about it and articulate it is for, like, I know that my listeners are going to be kind of jumping up and down with kind of nodding, and also with joy that there is a solution to this. But I love how you share in the book that actually before having children, your relationship with Seth, your husband, was actually quite equitable. And I think, again, a lot of women can relate to that.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so dangerous, because we don't have conversations about these issues, because you assume the same patterns are going to hold. And then this is the second danger. So that's danger number one. And we'll talk about how we can all remedy that. But danger two, I think, is that the home presents really small and petty, Nikki, right? So that's the danger, right? So if I had left it as, I'm having a fight over blueberries, right? Then I would be missing the whole point. And I think that's what the 8-year journey into fair play showed me, right? That private lives, and this is from a sociologist, C. Wright Mills, and I remember this in college being very profound, and it's still profound. Private lives are public issues. And once I realized that this was not about blueberries, this was not about the man who told me that he's divorcing over a glue stick, right? It's very dangerous if we stay small. The real issues are much larger. And I think once we realize that this is not a you problem, this is not a me problem, this is a societal problem, then we're in so much better a place to fix it. Because then the shame and the guilt is not part of this equation.
Amen. Because I think with my work with my clients, what I hear time and time again, and it has been my own experience, is that somehow we think it's something we're doing wrong, that if we worked harder, or we had a better kind of productivity, or somehow we are failing as women. And I think what you've done is gone, actually, this is a systemic issue. The system is failing us culturally, society, and beyond. And talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg earlier, her quote when she says women will only have true equality when we share with them the responsibility of bringing up the next generation. And I think that's what you're doing in this book, which is powerful.
And fair play is a love letter to men. This is not, this is not, to say, there is one amazing man said to me, I'm willing to accept the female anger in the first half of your book because the solution has been so damn practical for my household. Right. So, I DM'd him back, thank you so much for accepting female anger, right? But I would say that the big surprise for me was that in the first month of my book coming out, we were starting to get, a really amazing response. And there was hundreds of emails coming into info@Eve Rodsky, right? I mean, how did people even find this? Sort of the email section of my website. And what we realized, what my team told me, was that 2/3 of those emails were from men.
Oh, wow.
And so this current system is not serving men either. It just, and this is really, and let's just break down a little bit of what happens, right? And I think this is important because this shows us the core finding a fair play. And then we can, of course, Nikki, go into all the important solutions that we can take agency in our own home. But I think right after, and I read about this, so you've seen this, but I think it's really important because right after the Blueberries Day, I was able to go on this breast cancer march. And you saw that in the book. I talk about, marching with, hi, Zach. See, women get interrupted every 3 minutes and 24 seconds. So, no, what do you need from me?
You take pictures.
Okay. Well, do you want to do it on your iPad?
Yeah.
At least if you're here, you can tell Nikki that you're a fair player, right?
Yeah.
This is, yeah. So,
Hi, Zach.
Say hi. Say, how old are you?
I'm 11.
And so, in terms of what you do in terms of fair play at home, Zach, how does it come alive for you as in your life?
Yeah, so I hold the cart of the dishes, and to do the dishes, you need to CPE the whole task instead of just washing the dishes and putting them in the dishwasher. After about an hour, you have to take them out of the dishwasher and then put them in their cabinets where they need to go. So instead of just doing part of the task, you need to CPE it and do the whole task.
I love that, Zach.
I've never had that in a podcast. We got a little visitor. Okay, at least close the door. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about boundaries in a minute, Nikki. But yeah, so I think my work is done. I keep thinking if the Gen Z generation of men understand that, taking out garbage means putting the liner back in, then we've done our job, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And I know that we'll come on to talk about that whole CPE and the importance of it in a bit. But I love that it's, it's living alive and well in your family. So that's great.
It is. But what I do want to say before we get into what the solution is, was I think it's very similar to what you say you do with your clients, right? It's this idea that I was on this beautiful morning, this girls' weekend morning, when we could do things like that, right? In all pink, we were honoring a friend of mine that had died in law school from breast cancer. We were chanting, courage, strength, and power, not just a female problem. We were at this beautiful march, and this was a Saturday morning. And at noon, it was like the reverse Cinderella, where all of a sudden we started getting pings, right? Pings, and our phones start ringing. And all of a sudden, these really powerful women on this amazing morning together started saying, getting texts like my friend Kate's husband, where is Hudson's soccer bag? My other friend's husband, what's the address of the birthday party? And did you leave me a gift? My favorite was my other friend's husband, who said, do the kids need to eat lunch? And so what was so profound about that day was that I had made this reservation downtown LA at this dim sum restaurant, and all these very powerful women, the head of Cedars-Sinai Stroke and Trauma Department, an award-winning producer, these women started saying to me, Nikki, maybe I left my partner with too much to do, right? Or I have to go relieve the babysitter. And they disbanded on me. They disbanded to go, find Hudson's soccer bag, to go take the kids to the birthday party, and to make their children lunch. And it was that day that I decided to start my resistance. And it was a very small act of resistance, but I counted up before we all left how many emails and phone calls and texts we had received. And really it was 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women in 30 minutes.
Wow. And when I was reading that story, it reminded me of a very similar incident I'd had with one of my friends. We were actually on a hen do. So she'd had her children just before she got married, and went on a hen do, and her husband-to-be was taking the children swimming, and she got a call while she was on her hen party, so a bachelorette party.
Yeah.
And him saying, I've taken the kids swimming. I've got them into the swimming baths. We've been swimming, and when I got them back out, they hadn't got any underwear in their bags. So they now haven't got any underwear. Why didn't you put the underwear in the bags?
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, oh my God, this woman is on her head party, and you're ringing to make that statement.
It makes me tear up still. It literally 8 years later, I get very emotional about these things because I think it's that blame, right? The blame. It's that expectation that it's us, and this is why ultimately that day led ultimately to the core finding of fair play, which is back to what we just said, right? That the home presents small, where you think you're fighting over Hudson's soccer bag, right? But the core finding of fair play was this unbelievable thing that kept happening to me, Nikki, is I told you I'm very analog. So I write in moleskin after moleskin after moleskin. And what started happening was I started to see a pattern where ultimately it became very clear to me that we as a society, and I don't just mean the US, right? I mean all developed nations, because I interviewed many, many couples out of the UK, Australia, Japan, India. I mean, you name it. The Netherlands, Switzerland. So it was bigger than these small issues, and really, it was this idea that everywhere we are guarding men's time. Did I lose you? Okay, no, good. Everywhere we are treating and guarding men's time as finite, like diamonds, and we view and value women's time as infinite, like sand. Now, that's a very esoteric comparison, diamonds and sand. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I started to unpack these issues, I realized that, well, of course, we're not valuing women's time equally in the workplace, right? Because women get paid 80 cents on the dollar for every man. If you're a woman of color, it's more like 50 cents on the dollar. But Nikki, it was the home. It was the home that was, it was more insidious, and it was women that weren't valuing their own time. Yeah. And it was every single day I was writing down what I call another toxic time message, where women were guarding men's time with things like, well, of course I'm the one who picks up the call from the school because my husband makes more money than me. Right. So that was a big one. So let's unpack that argument for a minute, right? Because I chose philanthropy. I'm a mediator, and I work with families and their foundations and their family businesses. My husband chose private equity. So that would mean that I'm relegated to doing all the invisible labor in my home forever because my husband chose private equity. And I would argue my job is actually more valuable, right? But that argument doesn't work. Other women were saying to me things like, well, I'm just a better multitasker. You know, my partner's better at focusing on one task at a time. It's my superpower, you know? And so for that one, I had to go to one of the top, Harvard neuroscientists that I work with and with my clients. In my day job, we fund his department. And this was another day that, this was the only other day really that I sobbed, like actually, had almost a breakdown over these issues. And it was when this man in his office, when I asked him, are women better multitaskers or wired differently for care? He just looked at me and said, imagine, Eve, we men could convince you women that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for my career. So
the patriarchal system. Yeah.
That was a hard day for me because that was my toxic time message where I believed having it all meant doing it all. And I think it was because I came out of a single mom household where I was like, I can do everything. I don't need anybody. Right. So I convinced myself I was better at wiping asses and doing dishes and every single thing else in our house. And so that day was really hard for me. And then other women, their toxic time message was, in the time it takes me to tell him or her, right, what to do, I might as well do it myself.
Yeah. And I hear that so many times, and I can relate to that.
Absolutely. So for that one, I went to Dan Ariely. He's a Wall Street Journal, New York Times bestselling behavioral economist. And so I said, and he looks at time. So I asked him, is that a good argument? And the time it takes me to tell them what to do, I should do it myself. He said it's the worst argument he's ever heard for women, because of course it makes sense to teach somebody, right, or tell someone how to wipe the asses and do the dishes. I put tell in quotes, but otherwise it's at the expense of your finite time that you could be using on your self-care, on writing your next book, on your podcasting, on your career.
Yeah.
So what I'm here to say is that there's actually really no way to find time, and to guard men's time in these ways is toxic. Yeah. And it allows us to end up in this paradigm where not only are we blamed for not having the underwear in the swim bag, right? But we believe that having it all means doing it all.
Yeah. And I love that in the book you map out those kind of toxic time messages and the myths and kind of how we've found ourselves in this place. And I think you also brilliantly explain actually the context around what our generation is kind of living through, because you reference, I think it's Dr. Sherry Blake's term, that a lot of women, kind of single married women,
yes,
they're, and you talk about, I think, is it 21 hours extra per week on the woman after having children?
Well, this is the craziest statistic that I found, because again, I kept feeling so sad that Seth and I had this equal dynamic, as you were talking about earlier. And then things were changing, but then it felt so good to see the basic science show that men on average do 5 to 15 hours a week less after kids come along. So back to, right, private lives are public issues. This is not a you problem. This is a societal problem. This is a structural problem with how we value care and caregiving and how we look at child rearing in our society. And so if any of these issues feel resonant to you, I will say you're not alone.
Yeah, and you also very clearly say that even contemporary research shows that women still do the bulk of this, even in two-earner households, and even when the mother is the kind of main breadwinner. So it's
2/3 or more. Yes, Nikki. Yeah. What I found, right, women hold 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, regardless of whether we work outside the home, and even if we're the primary breadwinners. And on top of that, globally, women, Oxfam just came out with a very powerful statistic that globally, women do $10.9 trillion of unpaid labor, invisible work a year. And so that, again, this is not a blueberries issue. This is a societal issue. But at the time when I thought my marriage was falling apart, it did feel so personal to me that I think I felt a lot of guilt and shame of sharing these issues. So I think my mission is just to have people like you, right, the cultural warriors of our society, who work with mothers, who are in the trenches every day, understand and come with me on this journey to normalize and change this really fucked up dynamic that is really rearing its ugly head especially in this pandemic.
Yeah, because as you say, the invisible workload sometimes has now become visible. People are seeing it on their Zoom or team meetings, the juggle that working mums are having to do. And I think the irony of this is that, the delegating or the, having a systemized approach to work, the women that we're talking to here are probably very used to doing it in their careers, but for somehow it gets lost when it's applied in the home.
Yeah, well, even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group, Nikki, has more clearly defined expectations in the home. In her group, before COVID, if you didn't bring snack twice to the group, you're out. But the home, right? We're dying in decision fatigue. We are literally yelling at each other who's taking the dog out right when the dog's about to take a piss on your carpet, right? We are setting the table. We're yelling over who's setting the table when we're already tired and we're hangry. We do not treat our home with any respect and rigor. And that was one of the core findings that can now, sort of lead us into some of the individual solutions. So I will tell you, I am fighting for those systemic solutions. But I think on this podcast, I think it's wonderful that you want to highlight things that we can start doing today in our own homes to start changing those dynamics.
And because you talk about, what you've put together with Fair Play, and we're going to come into that in a minute, is it's a 2-player game is what you're talking about here. And it should be a 3-player game in terms of the government or the system.
Yes.
But what we're talking about is the people in partnership here, the husband, wife, partners, whatever it might be, that together as a 2-player kind of game, we can do this.
Absolutely. That's what I made a deliberate decision to just focus on the home in this book, knowing that you could be rest assured that I don't leave it in the home, right? That I am fighting for very systemic solutions that we can talk about later. But yes, this is a 2-player game. This is how, and if you're a single mother, you can use this with your children and your greater community. And we'll talk about that as well, because I have a lot of single mothers and fathers in my data set.
Yeah.
But we're talking right now primarily to couples. And that this is a lot of hetero cisgender data. But as I said before, a lot of these patterns play out in same-sex couples as well. So we can make sure that we talk about that.
So just joining the dots here, you were talking earlier about this experience that you had with your girlfriends when you went on this breast cancer kind of walk, and it led you to create this list called the Shit I Do list. Could you just share kind of how that came about? Because I suppose that's the path to how Fair Play was really created.
Absolutely. So after that day, that breast cancer march, that fateful day where I counted up how many texts and phone calls we had received, I decided to start reading articles about what the heck is happening to me. And that's where I came up with understanding that we've been talking about this for 100 years. And Virginia Woolf, basically 100 years ago said, a woman could never be Shakespeare because she would never have an unencumbered mind. Or have a metaphorical room of one's own. We've used the word mental load. You may have seen some cartoons about the mental load. We've been using the term emotional labor. We've heard it in terms of the second shift. But my favorite term was invisible work. And Nikki, why I love that so much was because, as you said, right, if you make the invisible visible, there sounds like there's a solution in there. So I did what any respectable lawyer would do. I opened an Excel spreadsheet and I started to interview women, to call them up, to text them, especially the women on my march with me. I found this article from 1986. It's calling What's Happening to Us Invisible Work. Please let me know anything you do in your home that you think is invisible to your partner or your children that takes more than 2 minutes. So this was the best, most communal exercise because it's probably how you feel when you podcast and you get, such beautiful messages from your listeners. It was a community of women who started to weigh in on this spreadsheet. And over 9 months, I got the most beautiful answers where women I didn't even know started reaching out saying things like, thank you, Eve, for attending dental appointments and medical appointments and making school lunches. But what about Elf on the Shelf? That's 20 nights times 30 minutes or something. I'm like, okay, well, I'm a Jew, so I didn't know about that. So yeah, do Elf on the Shelf, right? Other women reaching out to me saying, I noticed you put 2 minutes for applying sunscreen in your spreadsheet, but what about the 30 minutes for the chase? And so 30 minutes for the chase, right? So really fun exercise. It grew into 98 tabs on the Excel tabs in the bottom, with sub-tabs of about 2,000 items of invisible work, which ultimately became the Fair Play card. So we'll talk about that. But that list, that 9-month culmination, Nikki, was me doing like what a lot of us do when we maybe lose our voice in our home, but have it in the workplace. I just decided to take the 19 million megabyte spreadsheet, this big Shit I Do spreadsheet, and send it to Seth with no context. He didn't even know I was working on this thing. Just one day I sent it to Seth with a subject line, can't wait to discuss. And as you can imagine, right, that went over well. I didn't even get the courtesy, as I say, of the 3 monkey trio of the see no, hear no, whatever, do no evil monkeys or whatever. I just got that sad emoji that with that monkey that's covering its eyes. That's response to my list. But Nikki was actually worse in other homes because in other homes, this should I do list had unleashed a shitstorm. And what I mean by that is the things like this woman called you can't make this stuff up. I get a message, a voicemail message from this woman who says, I got your spreadsheet from the Jewish Federation of Arizona. I have no idea how it got there. And I want to let you know that thank you for your spreadsheet. I'm leaving my marriage. And so I started to realize that not only do lists alone not work, but they can, when you unleash some consciousness without any solutions, right, or steps forward, then all of a sudden you can become in a feedback loop that can become dangerous.
Yeah, and it's always, as I was reading it, I was imagining it's almost like a death by 100 cuts because you've got these 100 tasks, haven't you? And then it's pouring almost vinegar into the wound without a solution on how to repair it.
It felt like vinegar, yes. And so that's the day I realized that lists alone don't work. So I had a crossroads there where I thought to myself, okay, I did everything I could, or at least I thought I had, because I'd spent 9 months on this amazing crowdsourced list. It wasn't working. Seth wasn't responding to the list. It was causing other women to leave their marriage, right? So it was like this Pandora's box. And so at that moment, I said to myself, do I just delete the spreadsheet and resign myself to doing it all and lose myself in the process, which was happening to me at the time? Or do I get my ass in gear and become my own client? That's what I did.
Thank God you did. Not only, thank you collectively for women all around the world for not only taking the time to put this list together, but then having the kind of passion and determination to do something with it.
Yeah, it was scary at that time, but I felt like my day job is I'm a mediator for really highly complex families. And I don't know if Succession, the HBO show, has gotten to your coast yet.
Yes.
But that's a really good metaphor for what I do. And it's a highly complex job. And what I do is I create systems for families based on explicitly defined expectations, fairness and transparency, policies, all the things you learn as a mediator and a lawyer, that had families, even the most difficult families across generations, being able to communicate with grace and humor and generosity around highly complex organizational and financial decisions. And what I realized was, what if I just pretend that my home is my most important organization? And I started applying these systems that I've been using for 10 years into my own home. And that's how Fair Play was born. And it's obviously changed my life, as you know, because I wrote about it. But it's the thousands of people who are playing along with me, the every day, the info Eve Rodsky emails we get, or the pictures of men who say to me, I didn't think I would be playing this card game in Vegas, right? Showing me the Fair Play cards. And I'm like, this is amazing. So what I realized at that beautiful time in this journey is that lists alone don't work, but guess what? Systems do.
So the system you created is this 100 cards of fair play, isn't it?
Yeah.
60 if you don't have children, but 100 if you've got children in your home. And you've broken them down into kind of master suites. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And there are exactly perfect explanation. It's a metaphorical card game, or you can actually play. And any of your listeners, we have some prototypes left. I'm happy to send them. I know shipping's been very slow in the U.S. because of some, political post office stuff that's been happening. Yeah. But we will also have real beautiful cards by the end of the year that are available from Potter, which is my favorite imprint and stationery imprint. But the beauty of these cards is that they are an invitation to conversations that we're not having.
Yeah.
And as a mediator, I work with a lot of conversation designers, and it sounds very strange, but I mediate with a lot of other people who are in these highly complex boardrooms. And one of them is my friend Dan Stillman, who's a conversation designer. And he says that one of the big problems is we don't have any invitations, right? Or our invitation to discuss things end up being like what I did, sending a spreadsheet just saying, can't wait to discuss, right? Or the other person is not really being invited to the table. But let's back up, because maybe we can just lay out just what fair play is in 100 words. Because it's really not rocket science. It's actually real science. It's based on organizational management science that's been working in the workplace for 50 years. It's based on motivational science. It's based on a lot of different communication science. So this is not just me talking here. You can rest assured, I have 10 expert disciplines that weigh in on the system. And what it is really just an ownership mindset. So we hear a lot about Carol Dweck's growth mindset.
Yes.
This is an ownership mindset. And what that means is we are going to own a task from start to finish, from conception to planning to execution. So what do I mean by that? Well, all you really need to do is think about mustard. So if we can close our eyes as listeners for a minute and picture the mustard or your favorite condiment that's in your refrigerator, how did it get there? So I break it down into a 3-step process. Step 1 is somebody had to know, right? Nikki, your second son, Johnny, likes yellow mustard on his protein. Otherwise, he won't eat it. He chokes. That in the organizational management world is what we call conception. And then somebody has to monitor that mustard for when it's running low and put it on a grocery list with everything else you need for the week, with the rest of your groceries for dinners, lunches, snacks. That in organizational management is what we call planning. And then someone has to get their butt to the store to go purchase the yellow mustard. And maybe now it's more complicated because we have gloves and masks or whatever, but that is the execution phase. Now, in the cisgender couples, the hundreds of cisgender couples that I interviewed, that is where men were stepping in at the execution phase, going to the store for the mustard. And then you guys are bringing home spicy Dijon every fucking time. And I asked you for French's yellow mustard, right? Yeah. And so don't you sit at the table and see what Johnny eats? And you've been here for 7 years, right? So all of a sudden you can hear how my tone is changing, right? I'm not talking about mustard anymore, right? I'm starting to start an argument around accountability and trust. But what if I said to you that this is a systems breakdown that would never, or would very rarely happen in the workplace? You would never walk into your boss's office and say, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. We don't operate like that. Like I said before, my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group, we have clearly defined expectations. Yeah. But in the home, we are breaking up the conception and planning and the execution. And so the only way to solve that is to move to an ownership mindset where the conception, planning, and execution of a task, where groceries, the whole task stays with one person. It eliminates exactly what men told me they hated about home life. The number one thing men said that they hated about home life was that they can't get anything right. Yeah. That they're nagged because they do go to the store for the mustard and they bring home the wrong thing. So that's why Fair Play did become a love letter to men. And then women said that the thing that they hated about home life was they can never shut their mind off, that they're dying in thoughts. And insomnia and autoimmune diseases, right? From the stress of always having to remember everything. So really the only way to solve those two issues simultaneously is to move to an ownership mindset. And that's it. Not rocket science, but that's really the core tenet of Fair Play. And if you just take that away from today, then we did our job.
And I think that's where the practical and profound kind of combine, because I think you've wrapped up in one system, the years of resentment that have gone through relationships, the communication problems, and kind of the crux of what the issue is. And I know that you talk about in the book, because you've done years of research around this, that you would interview couples and say to perhaps the husband, what car do you own? And he might say, oh, actually, I do all the cooking. But then if you ask him, actually, well, do you do the meal planning and then the buying of the groceries? And they'd go, well, no. And you'd make it clear, well, you don't actually hold that card because the mental load still sits with your partner.
Exactly. And the reminder still sticks with your partner.
Yes.
And the blame still sticks with your partners, just like your beautiful story of those underwear in the swim bag. Yeah. So it's when you transfer over to an ownership mindset, then guess what? Mistakes are still made. But I'm not being blamed for them. So that was and then it doesn't have to be 50-50 either. So that was the beauty of this, right? So many people were stuck in this idea of what 50-50 meant, but instead what they were doing was things that were completely antithetical to fair play and what the science shows. They were doing things like, well, I took the dog out last night, so it's your turn to take the dog out tonight. And so I'm doing lunch, for the dog. You have to do breakfast for the dog, right? It was sort of task by task, tit for tat. And it could, keeping track of that is crazy. I don't know how you would even do that. But B, it's so petty and it feels so stressful and you're all monitoring who did what last, right? But if I say to you, Seth, you own garbage and I never have to think about it again, it's just freeing. It's freeing. And if it doesn't get done, then we come back to the table. We'll talk about that because that was one of the two most powerful questions I always get, right? Is how do you bring your partner to the table?
Yes.
So actually, you can listen to this podcast. That's a good way to do it. But how do you bring your partner to the table? But also, what happens if they don't do their card, right? What happens if I ask them or they say they're going to do it and they don't do it? So that we can get into a little bit of that now. But really, what I want to say about the freeing nature is exactly what you said, Nikki. It's this idea that how nice that it's not on me. And then when something goes wrong, I'm not being blamed.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so much in the book around how you play to win on this. So you've got an invitation that you can send out to your partner to even invite them to play, which I think is genius. Because as you say, we sometimes forget that step, inviting somebody to play with us and how that then just changes the dynamic and the dance between us.
Absolutely. And so I think the important thing to understand here about all of this and about what we said before around the, what if my partner doesn't hold their cards, right? There's a lot of questions, but I think to back up, systems work, but they're not going to work if you're not inviting someone into that system. And also if you're not practicing communication. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is another takeaway that if this is all you get out of today, it's a really important insight. And I talk about this as a mediator all the time. And when I did my fair play research, it panned out exactly the same as in my workplace, in my work data, which is that people treat communication as a means to an end. When I ask people why they communicate, it's always, well, I needed to get this, or I had to tell them that, right? It's needed, had, it's all these words that are showing me that you're talking about a means to an end. So a lot of what I do in my mediation practice and what fair play is about is saying, what if I told you that communication is just a practice?
Yeah.
It's actually a practice just as important as meditation, a practice just as important as exercise.
Yeah.
And then how do you practice communication? And so when I ask couples that, most people look at me like I'm crazy, right? But what I'm talking about is the idea of frequent check-ins. So let's just go into the 3 steps of communication that fair play is based on, because you start using these today. 1, it's based on the fact, Nikki, that we are already communicating. And I think that that's step 1 is really important because a lot of women in my data set, and I laugh because still to this day, I hear this from women, but a lot of women in my data set said things to me like, I can't communicate about domestic life. It's too triggering. We don't talk about these things. So I did that recently. I DM'd a woman who told me that. And then she was somebody who posted in a 27,000 member Facebook group out of the UK called The Reasons I Hate My Partner During COVID. She posted, if my husband dies during COVID-19, it's not because of the disease, it's because of me, right? So she's publicly threatening murder on this 27,000 member Facebook group that maybe some of your listeners know about because I said it's out of the UK. And, but she's telling me in a DM that she doesn't communicate about domestic life. Another woman did the same thing. She said, I don't communicate about domestic life, but then she tells me about the time she dumps wet clothes in her partner's pillow when they forgot to bring them, put them in the dryer, right? So step one here for your listeners is that we are already communicating about domestic life. And so I'm telling you, you can use your voice in a communication shift in a beautiful way. I'm not asking for a communication start, but once we realize that this is a shift to more effective communication because we're already communicating, so many more women were willing to use their voice. Yeah. So that's step one. We're already communicating, and I can go onto your, Nest camera in your homes and see 100 ways you've communicated about domestic life today. And I don't even need you. I need your audio, right? So that's step one. Step two is the number one thing that women, again, back to talking to women and men, the number one thing women communicated to me was their vulnerability and how they talk about the home life. If they were willing to finally admit a vulnerability when I drew it out of them, was giving feedback in the moment. Why is the sponge in the sink? Didn't you know you had to do that, right? This reactive nature of having to get out whatever they had to get out once they were communicating. And the number one thing men told me that was happening to them was avoidant behavior, not wanting to engage, slinking away, avoiding until finally they boiled over and couldn't avoid the conversation anymore. So that dynamic lends itself to a very important rule. So rule one is recognize you're already communicating. Number two is no feedback in the moment. I do this in my mediation practice, and I'm asking your listeners to do this. Try to hold your tongue and wait for it. Giving feedback in the moment is toxic. Your listener can't hear you. And so then when you get to the rule 3 of the communication section of Fair Play, it's this idea of treating communication as a practice, which is where we started in this part of the conversation. This idea that a check-in, a nightly 10-minute check-in, a weekly check-in will change your life. Before anything else, before you can enter a system, we have to get our communication practices right, or at least started. And that's really this 3-step process that I unpack, as you say, much in more depth. Yeah. But it's really that easy. It's much easier said than done. Not giving feedback in the moment, Nikki, took me about 3 years.
And that brings me on to probably something that is just as powerful as the practical elements of this, is you also touch on the psychological aspects and talking about knowing your type before you play Fair Play. And just at a very high level, would you mind explaining what those types are? Because again, I think people listening will be able to go, oh gosh, yeah, that's me, and I can see that.
Yes, this all goes back to what's your fair is not my fair. Mm-hmm. And I'm not here to tell you that your life needs to be 50-50. I'm not here to say that I understand what your home looks like, right? I'm not doing that. What I'm trying to say is that the science shows that perceived fairness is way more important than actual fairness. And so what I'm asking you to do is to say that instead of blowing up your life, even though I do love Eat, Pray, Love so much, right? But instead of blowing up your life and just leaving, which is a narrative we hear a lot for relief on these issues. What if I said to you that I just want you to get to a place where you feel like your relationship feels fair, and you can take a breath and say, I have an active teammate. I have a real partner, a true partner in the home. But that takes understanding your personality type. And what I mean by that is, if you are a stay-at-home mom who says that I take pride in this work, and this is my job, and I have a partner who I believe is his role as the primary breadwinner, then I will still tell you that you cannot hold all the cards for your family, because you will sort of drown in invisible work. But the amount of cards and tasks and the ownership mindset that you will probably share will look differently than a woman who's a primary breadwinner.
Yeah.
And so I talk in the book about women first looking at themselves and looking at their partners, but are you an intentional traditionalist? Was this the life that you expected? Your fair play will look different. Are you an accidental traditionalist? That was me, someone who was giving up their career slowly, death by 1,000 cuts, as you said earlier, Nikki, but I wasn't doing it really voluntarily. So I called myself an accidental traditionalist. Are you a collaborator, somebody who already feels things are really fair, and this is just about you actually making it even more fair in your home? So the beauty is that you can start examining through the book who you are. And that's really important because it'll lead to what your fair is. And again, what's equal is not fair. What's fair is not equal. The goal here is not 50-50. It's just to get to a place where both people in their partnerships feel like there is perceived fairness. And also there's a place in your relationship where you feel like your kids are not failure to launch children, where you've done everything for them. So then, like my friend, my professor, Julia Lithcott-Hames, who wrote a beautiful book called How to Raise an Adult. She talks about people getting to Stanford and collapsing because they've never made their own doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
The kids have never folded their own laundry. They've never completed the shit work in their home. Their parents have always done it for them. And so they are collapse when they have to wash their own macaroni and cheese hot plate, So, so that's really the goal. But it does take us, and this gets back to what we said, whether it's communication or personalities, it requires us to do work on ourselves.
And I'm like, amen to all of that. And there's so much more that we could dive into. And all that I would say to people is you have to get this book and explore it, because literally, as I said to you at the beginning, Eve, every single page I'd highlighted, underlined, tabbed something within the book. And that's, and I love reading books, but it's very rare that literally every page a book does that to me. So it is jam-packed with goodness. So if there's just one thing that you hope a working mum that's listening to you talk today takes away from this, what would you want that to be?
What I want it to be is to tell you that your time is diamonds. Mm-hmm. You only have 24 hours in a day, just like your partner. And so if we can move from looking at time as money into your time is just 24 hours in a day, and you get as much choice, you deserve as much choice over how you use your time as your partner. And we will help you get there. That's what I want your listeners to know. Your time is diamonds. Thank you for listening here. You used your time with us. But when you can start thinking of yourself as being a diamond, then you give yourself the boundaries, the permission to be unavailable. Then you give yourself your voice back. And then you can get rid of the guilt and shame that holds so many of us back.
I've just got goosebumps with you saying that, Eve. So I'm sure people are going to want to find out more about you, your book and your cards. Could you tell us where we can find you?
Yes, you can find me at Fair Play Life. That's our movement. As I said before, I would end with the movement here, which is for fair play, inviting men into the home, fair day, making sure that there's enough flexibility and changing the idea of an ideal worker so that women can be 50% of the top 100 Forbes list one day, and fair pay equity. So if you're interested in sort of the more global movement that we're trying to build, please follow Fair Play Life. And if you want to just find me, our team answers our DMs. We can send you the cards. And that's Eve Rodsky on Instagram.
Fantastic. I'll put all the links in the show notes for that.
Oh, and Fair Play Life. Fair Play Life. There's a lot of tools there. If you're interested in finding the cards right immediately, you can find a PDF of them. We also have the CPE checklist. If you're interested to understand what it means, or what I think it means to own a card with an ownership mindset, you can click on the CPE checklist and see the start to finish nature of a task.
Amazing. Thank you. And I will put all that in the show notes, and I know people will want to be going to check you out. And thank you for making the time to do this today, Eve. It's just been an absolute pleasure.
It's been so fun, and your wonderful questions.
That was good, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Eve's just brilliant, isn't she? You know, such profound but practical things that she shared there. And I really urge you to go and get Eve's book, Fair Play, and go and grab her cards, head over to her website, download the resources, and just start having these conversations. Eve gives us kind of the step-by-step resources to empower us to use our voice and create that equitable kind of environment at home. And I think it's not just important for us, but really important for our children. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk/45, you'll find all the links that Eve talked about, you know, to her website, to her book, to where you can get hold of the cards. So that's wisdom for workingmums, mums.co.uk/4 and the number 5. So wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk/45. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.